Mage wins the Kentucky Derby. Pretty Mischievous wins the Kentucky Oaks. That and so much more on this episode of the Win Place Show. Salutations and welcome, friends, to another episode of the Win Place Show. I am your host, Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Well, like I said, welcome to the Win Place Show, where we cover all aspects of horse racing and handicapping, and we are proudly part of the Trust the Profits YouTube network. Make sure to press that subscribe button here on Trust the Profits. We are nearing 10,000 subscribers, so maybe you can be the 10,000th, and if so, thank you so very much. Really appreciate everyone's support this entire Kentucky Derby lead up. And guess what? We're not going to let up. We're still going to have a ton of great content coming for you for the Preakness, for the Belmont, going into the summer at Saratoga, going into the fall season at Keeneland, going into the Breeders' Cup. It's all year round. It never stops. So we are going to have great content for you here in North America. We're also going to be covering racing taking place over in Europe and Asia, all over the world, because that's an international game. And I think we came to realize that over the weekend at Churchill Downs for the Kentucky Derby, where, of course, we saw a lot of Venezuelan flags out in abundance when Mage won, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But like I said, make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits. Make sure to like this video and let me know your thoughts on Kentucky Derby weekend. What was your big takeaway? Obviously, it's the Derby, but, maybe an undercard race that you really like, or a performance from a younger horse that really stood out. There's a bunch. We're going to talk about them. So make sure to, like I said, comment below with what your big takeaway was over the weekend. And again, thank you so much for all of you who tuned into the live stream. We had over 6,000 people tuning into the live stream on Friday and Saturday. It was awesome. I was on air, I think, for about, calculated like 17 hours between those 2 days. That was maybe a little too much for me. I don't know. The voice is still a little hoarse coming back. I haven't talked at all today, Sunday, as I'm recording this. So, it's one of those. We'll get back to it, but it was awesome to interact with all of you. So again, thank you so much for tuning in and checking it out. Well, listen, I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm not going to sit there and say, well, let's start on Friday and kind of build up to the Kentucky Derby. Let's talk about the Kentucky Derby. What a race it was. It was obviously a ton of drama leading up to the Kentucky Derby. I feel like it's been years since I last did my last Win Play show, and that was last Monday. But nevertheless, we had a ton of scratches that obviously took place, from Practical Move to Continuar to Lord Miles, to Forte, and you had so many scratches that changed the complexion of these different races, and of this particular race. Obviously, the big scratch of Forte coming the morning of the Kentucky Derby, and we're going to get to that in a second. But really, throughout the week, we saw the kind of way in which things were ever changing in the Kentucky Derby picture, and we started seeing, footage emerge middle of the week of Forte taking a misstep during a morning gallop, and there was a lot of speculation as to the horse potentially not being able and sound enough to run in the race. But there was also a lot of other speculation going on in the background with regards to Safi Joseph Jr., which ended up coming to fruition, as well as other equine issues that obviously took place at Churchill Downs, not just leading up to, but on the day of the Kentucky Derby as well. We're going to touch on all of it. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and everything else in between. But let's at least start talking about the race itself. Obviously, like I said, Forte, the morning line favorite, scratches the morning of the race, and therefore you ended up seeing all of the money, including Mattress Mac, putting all that money on Angel of Empire, who ended up going down from morning line 8-1 to post time 7-2. Tapit Trice was your second choice at 9-2. Then you saw Derma and Two Fills as kind of pretty solidified third and fourth choices. And then everyone else was kind of double digits floating around a little bit, not too far away from each other. So it was an interesting field, and they got out and listen, they went fast. As we got closer and closer to the day of the race, I kept thinking this pace is going to get faster and faster and faster. And you started having horses like Cyclone Mischief that drew in from the far outside. And I said, that's going to push the pace a little bit more. And all these speed horses being on the inside and close to each other is going to probably push the pace a little bit more. And that's exactly what you saw. Verifying from the number 2 post position, absolutely gunning it, getting to the lead. Then you saw Kings Barnes with Jose Ortiz aboard, getting to the lead. More on that in a little bit, because the connections were not necessarily apparently thrilled with that ride from Jose Ortiz. But we saw they go out to the front. We saw Two Fills be very forwardly placed. We mentioned this on one of the shows that Larry Ravelli basically said to Jareth Loveberry, follow verifying. We know verifying is going to go just tuck in behind verifying, basically. Get an inside trip if you can, but follow verifying out of the chute. That way it's going to keep you out of trouble. So we knew that was going to take place. Then you saw Confidence Game, obviously, up there really close. You saw Reincarnate up there really close. So you saw a lot of horses pushing the pace, going pretty quick, up on the front ends, first half and quarter. Verifying starts to give way going around the back stretch and starting into the third turn. As he's giving way, looks like he hits the rail. I know there's been a bunch of internet sleuths kind of going frame by frame and showing where he hit the rail, etc. It does seem like he hit the rail. That really made things tough for Confidence Game, because Confidence Game was tucked in behind verifying, and when verifying started backing up, Confidence Game didn't really have anywhere to go, and that made his trip a little bit more difficult in that regard, and a little bit of a challenge. Ultimately, Kings Barnes takes over. Two Phils looms up on the outside and hits the home stretch with about a 2-length lead. Two Phils ran his eyeballs out in this race, and we'll talk more about him in a second. But then coming down the center of the track, here comes Mage, here comes Angel of Empire. They're making their runs late, and ultimately Mage, in his 4th career race, remember, he went maiden special weight, Fountain of Youth, Florida Derby, and he didn't win any of those latter two, and he goes on to win the Kentucky Derby in his 4th career race by a length over two Phils, who ran, like I said, his eyeballs out, and a hard-charging Angel of Empire, who was a length and a half back from Mage, finishing 3rd. That was, like I said, an absolutely incredible race and performance by Mage. Obviously, kudos to Javier Castellano. What an amazing ride, because Mage did not get out of the gate particularly well. If you go back and watch the break, he was a little slow. This is something we've talked about before, that he has a tendency of not being great out of the gate, which is a little odd that this has started to happen, in that he went wire to wire in his maiden debut, going 7 furlongs. And you thought, oh, this is a horse that has a lot of early speed. It doesn't seem like that's actually who he is. He kind of gets out a little bit slow. And Javier did an outstanding job of making sure that horse did not get hooked wide. He found a crease on the front stretch and just guided him over probably about 3 paths and got him right on the rail and saved a ton of room, and then was able to kick out wide coming for home. But a great ride there by Javier, I thought, on Mage. Obviously, Kentucky Derby winning ride is always a very good one. And like I said, Mage, great effort there, and have to feel great for Gustavo Delgado. You saw all the Venezuelan flags. We've been talking about the internationalization of the sport with regards to Japan, but as I've said before, if you've ever paid attention to South Florida and Gulfstream Park, you know how big the Venezuelan influence is in the South Florida horse racing circuit. It is massive. It is a huge part of their game. It is a huge industry. And so to see them break through and get this win on a huge stage like the Kentucky Derby, obviously feel great for Mage, who took a huge step forward as well when running a 105 Beyer speed figure, improving his last effort by 11 points. But listen, let's actually show that order of finish up here, just so, maybe we're all talking about the top 3, but let's talk about where everybody ended up going. Mage obviously getting the win, two Phils, finishing 2nd. And I got to say, what a second place effort, because everyone else who was up on that lead absolutely collapsed. You look at a horse like Verifying, who was up on the lead, finishes 16th. You look at a horse like Kings Barnes, who was up on the lead, finishes 14th. Reincarnate finishes 13th. Confidence Game finishes 10th. That's where the top 5 were all. Two Phils was right in the middle of that early on. Two Phils was in that group of those other 4 horses constituting the front 5. Two Phils is the only one who was able to hold on and do anything in this particular race. Nearly won. Some people I know are saying maybe Jareth Loveberry moved him a little too quickly. Hard for me to say. He saw an opening, and I think maybe Jareth thought maybe, hey, that opening might not be there very long. I'm going to sneak through on the inside here. He took that opening and went, and listen, almost paid off. I mean, not a lot of people were catching two Phils. I mean, Angel of Empire couldn't even get there. Mage ultimately was the only one to get there and managed to get the win. Those top 2, this is an amazing statistic. Gustavo Delgado is the trainer for Mage. Larry Ravelli is the trainer for two Phils. Those 2 men combined Okay. Larry Ravelli and Gustavo Delgado have not even had 100 starts in 2023. They've not even had 100 starters in 2023. We talk about the monopolization of horse racing from a trainer standpoint. All of these owners want to send their trainers to Steve Asmussen, to Chad Brown, to Todd Pletcher, to Bob Baffert, to Brad Cox. But guess what? The little guy won. And it shows that you don't have to be one of the big four or big five to train a Kentucky Derby winning connection. We saw it last year with Eric Reed. We see it this year with Gustavo Delgado. We see it with Two Phils finishing second. There are great horse people in the industry, and you don't have to just go to the same 4 or 5 people. And I'm hoping that some of this opens doors for trainers like Larry Ravelli, like Gustavo Delgado, to get more horses in their barn, to get better quality horses in their barn, and for owners to trust them with really great horses because they know how to navigate these horses and get them to the Kentucky Derby. The route that Two Phils took to get to the Kentucky Derby, I thought was masterful. I love that he went to the Jeff Ruby Stakes, locked up a win, no drama involved, and was able to be ready and fresh for the Kentucky Derby. Mage's campaign, very aggressive, but very smart, staying down in South Florida, knowing that circuit might be a little bit more susceptible outside of Forte. You can get yourself into the Derby, and now you have a young ascending horse, and maybe things break right, and indeed they did. Coming in third, Angel of Empire, the top of the Brad Cox horse. Listen, this was my top pick. My trifecta was really close. My trifecta I gave out was Angel of Empire, Two Phils, Derma Sotogake. I finished my first place horse finished third, my second place horse finished second, and my third place horse finished sixth. I was at least around the right area. And Mage, I got to give a shout out to all the guys on the channel because we collaborate on these videos. But Mage was in our final video we did for top value plays. Mage was our number one value play in the Kentucky Derby. So, we were all around it today, and I think we were trying to give out pretty good advice. Some of us were higher on some horses than others that finished a little further back, and we'll get to those in a second. But Angel of Empire, listen, ran a heck of a race. This was another one. People were worried. Oh, I saw a lot of consternation online. Only a 94 buyer speed figure, that Arkansas Derby. Guess what? Young horses can improve, and they get better. This happens, believe it or not. And Angel of Empire, everything about this horse suggested that it wants more ground. And that's exactly what it did. Angel of Empire is going to run in the Belmont probably. He's not running in the Preakness. Brad Cox has already said that because First Mission, one of his other horses, is going to be running in the Preakness. Bishop's Bay, who's a big time horse for him, is going to be running in the Peter Pan, might end up in the Belmont as well. So, it's very interesting to see Angel of Empire coming in third, light charge there, just didn't quite get there. Disarm finishing fourth. I think that was really one of the first really shocking developments. Listen, Mage winning is a surprise, but at the same time, I think a lot of us thought Mage was an up and ascending horse that we really liked. And it was just a matter of could he put it all together on the biggest stage? Well, he did. Disarm was a little surprising to me that he ran that well. He was also, that horse was speculation to a lot of rumors that he might be scratched on the day of the race. He ended up not getting scratched, but there was a lot of buzz swirling about Disarm leading up to the post time of that race. But ultimately, Disarm runs a great race only 3 weeks after running in the Lexington to secure enough points to get into the Kentucky Derby. Then you have Hit Show. And that's a horse that, again, ran a beautiful trip, much like Two Phils. Probably one of the better efforts from the front runners. He was sitting, I think, sixth early on, made a move around the third turn. I think he might have moved a little too early. Manny Franco moving a little on the outside, maybe a little too early, just kind of leveled out a little bit coming for home. But Hit Show, I thought, really did show a lot of guts there and a really nice effort. So that was, I thought, quite impressive. And then you get to the Japanese horse, Derma Sotogake, who nearly unseated his rider coming out of the gate. Christophe Lemaire almost losing his balance coming out of the gate. Derma, listen, I told you all week that this horse was not going to be on the lead. Now, he had a little bit more gate trouble than I was hoping that he was going to have, but he ended up having gate trouble and coming from way far back. He settled 13th or 14th early on, made a move, but ultimately kind of flattened out there in the home stretch, ultimately finished sixth in this race. Listen, the curse of the UAE Derby is still intact. The curse of post position 17 is still intact. The curse of the Japanese never winning a Kentucky Derby race is still intact. That said, I think it shows that they belong in these races, that this is not just a place filler that some people might claim that it is. Derma, I thought ran very, very well, all things considered, considering the trip, considering the break. I think that horse, does he win if he gets a cleaner break? Probably not. But does he hit the board? Possibly. And so I thought like I said, I thought he ran a heck of a race, finishing sixth. I was proud of that effort. I think all the connections should be proud of that effort. Both he and Mandarin Hero are going to be going back to Japan now to run in some of those races. So I encourage people to listen, continue to follow those two horses' careers, continue to follow their campaigns. Watch some of those races that are taking place over in Japan. You can find them on YouTube. Stay up late, wake up early, figure it out, do what I do. I'm a little bit of an insomniac with that stuff, but it's a fun way to obviously continue to follow their careers. Coming in seventh, Tapit Trice. Listen, we did a whole video on the trial of Tapit Trice. I was against Tapit Trice this whole time. What happened with Tapit Trice is exactly what I said was going to happen to Tapit Trice, which is, oh, geez, the horse doesn't break well. Oh, geez, that's not a great idea in the Kentucky Derby. And oh, geez, he's really talented and he's going to make a little bit of a run late. He made a little bit of a run late and finished seventh. Okay, that's about where I thought Tapit Trice was going to finish. I don't care how impeccably bred you are. If you don't know how to get out of the starting gate and make a trip for yourself, then you have a problem. And that's exactly what Tapit Trice had. Listen, he's skipping the Preakness. He's probably going to go to the Belmont. That's according to Todd Pletcher. That's the goal, is taking him to the Belmont. He's going to be fresh. I think he's a very, very credible Belmont horse. A very credible Belmont horse. You go that extra 2 furlongs, you go that mile and a half, the distance of champions. That's a very tough thing for any horse to do. He's bred to do it. Absolutely. He demonstrates he wants to do it. He does not get tired in races. And you're going to have a smaller field in the Belmont. And it's probably going to set up a little bit better where Louis Saez can get him to the outside and out in the clear a little bit more, which is where he likes to run. So, again, I think Tapit Trice, he has a bright future, but I just didn't like him in the spot at all. Raise Cane and Rocket Can, I actually thought both ran pretty decent races. Raise Cane certainly, I think, exceeded a lot of people's expectations for that horse. He kind of ran on and passed some horses late, tiring horses. Rocket Can, ran about a mid-pack race, which is what I kind of expected out of a Rocket Can type of a horse. Confidence Game, we mentioned, ran into some issues there, going around the turn behind Verifying, who has hit the rail and backing up. So he had some issues there. Looks like he is going to come to the Preakness. You have, Sun Thunder coming in, Mandarin Hero coming in. I will say Mandarin Hero finishes the best out of the also eligibles, right? Because you had Mandarin Hero finishing 12th, you had King Russell finishing 15th, and you had Cyclone Mischief finishing last. Those were your 3 also eligibles. So Mandarin Hero finishing the best out of those that just got into the race a few days before. Listen, 12th place in the Kentucky Derby is nothing to write home about, but hey, it wasn't that bad. And then you see a lot of horses that were up on the lead early who were really fading back late. And Jace's Road, that was kind of one of my thoughts for finishing last. And, he almost did it there. Cyclone Mischief ultimately finishing last. I mean, those horses were up close to the lead. Jace's Road listen, that horse is just not that fast. I mean, people, when they were speculating he was going to be in the lead, how? He couldn't get to the lead in the Louisiana Derby. I didn't know how he was going to get to the lead with better horses. So we'll see. Kings Barnes, by the way, I mentioned this. Kings Barnes was on the lead, which is where I roughly thought he was going to be. But what was fascinating was that a representative from Spendthrift went on Twitter and responded to somebody on Twitter. Somebody just said, hey, I hope, they tagged him. They said, hey, I hope, Kings Barnes is okay. I hope everything, they came back healthy from the race, etc. It was, just a pleasant, polite kind of tweet to send out. And the guy responded. He goes, yeah, the horse is okay. Too bad the kid, referring to 29-year-old Jose Ortiz, too bad the kid didn't listen to the riding instructions. Now, I don't know what riding instructions he was given, but how was Kings Barnes not supposed to be close to the lead? I mean, that's what that horse's MO was. I mean, he sat off of Verifying. That's kind of what I thought he was going to do. Did they want him back a little bit more, sitting mid-pack? I mean, that doesn't seem like Kings Barnes' game. You're breaking from the inside. You don't want to get too cute. You want to get out there and stay out of trouble. He ultimately wasn't quite good enough to sustain that really fast fraction. Okay, fine, but I don't know. I mean, I didn't think that Jose Ortiz's ride was that bad. So, that was a little surprising to see. But that that is where we are. Obviously, huge results there. Mage now looks like moving forward. Does seem like he has come back healthy out of the Kentucky Derby. Will likely, not confirmed yet, but will likely go to the Preakness, where he will be joined by a slew of other horses, a lot of first-time, new shooters, so to speak. Red Route 1 is going to be there. You got who else is going to be there? Oh gosh, National Treasure is going to be there. You're going to see Forte potentially there. There's still a lot of speculation. Forte is on the veterinary list in Kentucky. He needs to work out and demonstrate that he is healthy enough to get off of that list before he can run in the Preakness. Time might just run out. Pletcher has said that if he doesn't run in the Preakness, then he will go to the Travers next. So he is not going to the Belmont. The Belmont is going to be for Tapit Trice. That is Pletcher's Belmont horse, and he has made that abundantly clear, no matter how much anybody in the comments or on Twitter wants it to be the other way. Todd Pletcher basically has said Tapit Trice is the Belmont horse and Forte is going to the Travers if he doesn't make it to the Preakness. So there you go. That's when you can expect to see Forte. If it's not in 2 weeks, it's not going to be until the summer. So that's where, we stand with those horses. Got to, like I said, we got a bunch of others. First Mission, the Brad Cox horse who won the Lexington, is going to be waiting there as well. Confidence Game is probably going to be coming there. There's some speculations. Does Two Phil make it to the Preakness? I don't know about that. That was a huge effort from Two Phils to stay that close to that fast of a pace and hold on. That was a really gutty effort. That might take a lot out of a horse that 2 weeks turnaround might not be the greatest thing for. I've seen some speculation that Disarm might even be headed there. That would be 4 races in 8 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, for Disarm. Louisiana Derby, Lexington, Kentucky Derby, Preakness. That's a very aggressive and rigorous schedule if he decides to run that. So kind of the antithesis of Confidence Game, who's run the Rebel and then the Kentucky Derby. So a lot of things going on here. We're going to have you covered, though, as we move forward in the Preakness. And so listen, let's talk about some of these other races because there was a slew of great racing this weekend. That's the crazy part. An absolute slew of it. Let's start on Friday. And things really started off with a bang on Friday. The Ali Shiva Stakes. Smile Happy throwing his hat in the ring of that handicap division. West Willpower, Art Collector, finishing second and third. Last Samurai looking tired, as you would expect, off of a 2-week turnaround. Listen, Again, D. Wayne Lucas knows more about horses in his little finger than I will ever know in my entire lifetime. But his insistence on wheeling these horses back on short rest, sometimes it just doesn't make sense in some instances. And Last Samurai looked a little tired coming down the stretch, as did another horse that ran on Friday that we'll get to in a second. But ultimately, Smile Happy for Ken McPeak gets the job done. Another horse to consider in this very wide open, older handicap division, I should say. And one of the takeaways also, Rich Strike finishing a very distant 5th in that race. Eric Reed even kind of speculating that he didn't understand why that horse didn't run better on that day. This is, something that obviously Rich Strike has not won a race since last year's Kentucky Derby. So it has now been over a calendar year since he has won, and his only 2 career wins are a $30,000 maiden claimer in the Kentucky Derby. That's pretty incredible. And nevertheless, he ran a distance fifth. I don't know where he goes from there. I know there's a lot of Rich Strike fans out there, and I get it. You root for the little guy, you root for the underdog, and it was a great story last year. Understandable that there's a lot of fans, but at some point you got to look at reality too. And this horse is just not getting it done. You can say it's coming off a layoff. Maybe needs one more timeout. Didn't get a huge pace necessarily to run into. There might be some excuses, but when the trainer's even saying there's not really a lot of excuses for that effort, then you start to wonder how many more times are we going to see Rich Strike run on the track. So that's something to keep in mind. Right next in the next race, one of my up and coming favorite mares in the Modesty, Didia. I always say Didia, but I heard Travis Stone say Didia, so maybe it is Didia. I always say Didia, though, the Argentinian turf horse, and she put on, like I said, just a great show there in the Modesty. She is now won a grade 3 and a grade 1 here in the United States. She has won 7 consecutive races, 4 of which were here in the United States, 2 at Colonial Downs, 1 at the Fairgrounds, 1 at Churchill. She travels, folks. She takes her game on the road, as they would say. Those are 3 very different types of turf courses. Colonial's turf course, I think, is one of the better in the country. Fairgrounds, we all know that funky turf course that they've had because of all the rain and saturation where they had to move out the they've had to move things out and get things, the horses are running around and all the far outside and things like that. And then you have Churchill's turf, which is, last year obviously was a little bit of an issue. I should say a little bit, it was a huge issue because they canceled turf racing there for a long stretch. Seems to be still favoring a little bit more closer to front end speed, but certainly is in a little bit better condition, but quite different from what you see at a place like Colonial. One of the big upsets of the weekend came in the next race in the 8 bells, where we all, I think, thought Money's Gold was going to put on a show. Ultimately, it was a good show in terms of a very exciting finish, but ultimately, Rusty Arnold's Red Carpet Ready comes back from a poor effort last time out down at Gulfstream Park and gets the job done, cutting back and becoming a sprinter, which is kind of what I thought this horse was probably best at. I didn't think this horse was really a two-turn type of a horse, but ultimately gets the job done in the 8 bells. Money's Gold. Listen, far be it from me to criticize Irad Ortiz Jr., but it felt like he was not using that horse's best attribute, which is that horse's speed. I mean, he kind of kept everybody else in the race, in my opinion, and was kind of maybe saving a little too much in the tank and being a little too cute. Just blast it. When you have a horse that fast, naturally, just go. Just don't even worry about it. Like, just go. And especially in sprints, what are we doing? This isn't a marathon turf, where we have to divvy out a little bit of speed here and there. Felt like Irad kind of kept some other horses in the race, but that's not to take anything away from Red Carpet Ready. And this is a point that Sarah Elbad, we brought up on the capping the card for the other for Saturday. She made a point. It was about a different horse, but it was about Mo Strike for Victoria Oliver. But she made a point in that horse's instance. Mo Strike had broken Victoria Oliver's 0-4, whatever it was. I think 0-19 slump in graded stakes races. And Sarah said, I'm always interested in horses that break trainers' slumps because it says that there's something about that horse that's really, really good. That when trainers are in a funk, this horse kind of can overcome that to some extent, or is just like, this is their best horse in the barn. And Red Carpet Ready broke Rusty Arnold's funk. Rusty Arnold was 0-48 coming off the layoff before Red Carpet Ready won 2 races back. Guess what? Red Carpet Ready now coming back from a layoff. Okay. Again, for Rusty Arnold. This time, Rusty Arnold's now 1-62. I'll give you a guess of who the one is. Yep, Red Carpet Ready. Now Red Carpet Ready goes back and wins again, coming off a layoff. And that's an angle I probably should have paid more attention to. That Red Carpet Ready seems to be Rusty's best horse, and seems to be a pretty special one for him. So congrats to him and winning the 8 bells. That was awesome. And Money's Gold, listen, she's going to be fine. She's going to be very, very good. But maybe with the hype train, got a little bit ahead of ourselves there, a little out of in front of our skis. In the Grade 1 La Troyenne, in the Distaff division, we saw Played Hard go to the front and hold on. And that was, I thought, a fantastic effort. Society was out in front. Played Hard was kind of stalking in that second place position, and then Kick for Home. You think Secret Oath is going to get there. Secret Oath flattens out. Of course, Secret Oath ran only 3 weeks ago in the Apple Blossom, which was a very rigorous race. Then you had search results coming up for Chad Brown on the inside. Ultimately, Played Hard is able to hold both of them off. I thought a very, very impressive effort there in the La Troyenne. In the Edgewood Stakes, you had Heavenly Sunday taking him gate to wire on the turf. Never an easy thing to do. That was a horse that I viewed as a value play. Hopefully he played it up top because, she ran really, really well in that race. And also an indication of just how that Churchill Downs surface tends to play. Deep closers, you didn't really want to be there for that. You wanted to be up and around it. You wanted to be sitting at least mid-pack if you're a turf horse. Certainly on the dirt, you also typically didn't want to be too far back. The deep closers weren't doing great on the dirt either, but that turf course was always a little speed favoring. We saw a lot of front end speed, even if they didn't win, held on for second in a lot of instances, held on to get a piece. Whereas in other tracks, they might have faded back and fallen off the board. So something to keep in mind looking at that Churchill Downs turf. And then listen, in the Kentucky Oaks, pretty mischievous. She was my value play in the race. She was 10-1. I thought she was fantastic value. And she was so much the best. And I say that with all due respect to Gambling Girl, who I loved. She was my top pick in the Gazelle. And I joked with people when I saw her in person, she is the complete opposite of what you would expect, because in the Gazelle, when I was there in person to see it, you see the Chad Brown horses going back a month, Sheeta Booty and a Colt, and they both, they looked great. Muscles are rippling. The coach is shiny. Gambling Girl comes out. She's lanky. She hasn't filled out yet. Her coat's not particularly shiny. She looks a little scraggly. She kind of looks a little bit of a mess. It looks like you just woke her up from a nap. And she's like, what's going on? Am I supposed to race? It's sort of a thing. But she can run. When you get her on the track, she can run. She's got a great late kick. She can really run. And she gave a heck of an effort finishing second there to Pretty Mischievous. But Pretty Mischievous, the reason I say she was the best in that race, she was wide every step of the way. Breaking from that 14 post, she was 4 paths wide going around the first turn. She was wide going around turns 3 and 4. I mean, she traveled a sufficient amount more than every other horse in that race and still was able to stay relatively close to the front end despite a fast pace, and then really kick for home and hold off the late charging Gambling Girl. Wet Paint, the favorite, finishing third. Even Flavian Pratt saying, not quite the same as Oaklawn. Didn't quite have the same kick, didn't quite have the same type of performance and trip that we had there before. But certainly a horse that came running late as well, hit the board, finished third. But Pretty Mischievous gets the win there in the Kentucky Oaks. Now, on Saturday, there was obviously a slew of graded stakes races as well. You saw a huge upset right off the bat in the Derby City Distaff, where Monterey beats Goodnight Olive, who was the overwhelming favorite. And Goodnight Olive, what a bad trip. What a bad trip. And I know some people said, listen, she had a hole. Maybe she had a gap here or there. She could have shot through if she had the horse. Didn't seem like she did. But a lot of it came down to Wicked Halo, actually. Monterey was kind of running her race out on the front end, second back from a layoff. She took a big step forward. She's a real nice filly. But what you saw from Goodnight Olive sitting 4th, 5th early on, which is not unusual for her. She can sit off the pace and make a run. She's done it before. But Wicked Halo with Tyler Gaffley on board. I mean, Tyler did not give Irad and Goodnight Olive much room at all. I mean, he had Goodnight Olive boxed in on Wicked Halo. I mean, Wicked Halo was right there, and Goodnight Olive was having a very uncomfortable trip because of Wicked Halo being right there, and Tyler did not give an inch to Irad. And if you think that didn't matter, let's talk about the next race, which featured Fluffy Socks and Spinderella. Now, Spinderella was jockeyed by Tyler Gaffleone, Fluffy Socks jockeyed by Irad Ortiz Jr. If you don't think it's personal, watch the end of that race, because Irad gets on. So Spinderella gets onto the lead, coming for home. You think Spinderella, huge favorite, going to pull this one out. Fluffy Socks comes on the inside, and Irad gets by Tyler Gaffleone on Spinderella. And then as they cross the finish line, Irad looks back at Tyler and stands up in the saddle and cheers the way that Tyler always does when he wins a big race. I've never seen Irad do that before. You don't think it's personal? You don't think Irad was pissed off about the race before? You don't know what you're talking about. That was a personal ride for Irad, that he was going to beat Tyler in that race. Absolutely no two ways about it. And so Irad put his riding shoes on for that one and got the win there. Spinderella, listen, I think she's going to be fine. That was her first race back since August of last year. She will, like I said, I think she'll be perfectly fine. First time back off a really long layoff. She's a very classy filly. I'm excited to see her 2023 campaign. I'm excited for Fluffy Socks, too. That was a horse, 7-time runner-up. But very, very consistent horse. Always very honest, and finally got the job done there on Churchill Downs on the Kentucky Derby Day undercard. Pat Day Mile, we saw General Jim for Shug McGahee. Again, a horse that was in the Florida Derby. Let's remember this. This was a horse, or the Fountain of Youth, I should say. This is a horse that was in the Fountain of Youth and was scratched out of that race because of a spiked fever and a cough, and was scratched out and was, I think it was the Fountain, maybe it was the Florida Derby. It was scratched out of one of the Florida prep races. I'm getting them all mixed up in my head. But was the second choice to Forte that day. Was actually a lower price than Mage, okay, on the morning line. So that's one of the reasons why I really like General Jim is I held General Jim in pretty high regard going into that race down in Gulfstream Park. Now suddenly he comes back in this effort, runs a huge race off the bench for Shug McGahee. Again, Shug off the bench is never a sure deal. Certain horses you trust with Shug, though. General Jim, I think, is one of those types. Really great stretch battle between him and Fort Bragg. gutty effort from Fort Bragg, who was not a horse I particularly liked in that spot, but ran really a lot better than I anticipated for him to run. General Jim gets the win, though, in that Pat Day mile. That was, like I said, huge effort from him on that day. So kudos to Shug and General Jim for getting the job done there. And then in race number 9, the American Turf, shout out to Web Slinger. Huge price for Web Slinger, Mark Cassie's horse. And the reason I love this is Web Slinger is a horse that if you watch me on This Week in Stable Duel, which I do with Barry Spears and Gino Piccola on Friday mornings, we do This Week in Stable Duel where we give out long shots. We have given out Web Slinger, I swear to God, at least twice in the previous 2 races. We've always given out Web Slinger as a price that you want to use when you're playing Stable Duel, which is a little bit of more of a fixed odds type of a game, daily fantasy sports game. But Web Slinger is always a horse that we liked, that we always loved. I looked at that outside post position. I thought maybe, it was in over its head. But Web Slinger is a horse I really, really liked a lot. And, ultimately I didn't end up using, but I feel great. I mean, for the connections, that's amazing to see Web Slinger get the win. Huge upset over Farbridge. That was a really thrilling stretch run. Joel Rosario taking Farbridge, on the inside. Major dude right there, Mustache as well. That was a really, really bang, 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 bang finish between first through fourth. Carl Spackler, who I think a lot of people have expectations for, didn't run particularly well. Didn't run poorly, but just didn't really run that great. I think that's a horse, again, the hype train might have got out a little over its skis there on Carl Spackler, but Farbridge, I thought, ran a really good race. Watch what Joel does there. That horse showed a lot of gut splitting, going to the inside rail and busting through the inside rail to, in a little bit of an opening there to get there and almost get the win. But Web Slinger ultimately in the far outside had a little bit of an easier trip and, didn't save ground, but just had an easier trip and didn't have to navigate and be as agile as Farbridge did and got the job done. So credit to Web Slinger. Awesome performance. Listen, to the Churchill Downs Stakes, Cody's Wish gets the win. By the way, I think that was when Cody's Wish won. And this was race number 10 on the card. That was the first time a favorite won on Churchill Downs Kentucky Derby Day. That is incredible. 0 for 9 favorites. Post-time favorites were 0 for 9 leading up to that race. Cody's Wish gets the job done there. Hoist the Gold does what Hoist the Gold always does, which is finish underneath at a big price. And that's what Hoist the Gold did again. And you better believe I had a Cody's Wish Hoist the Gold exacta because that's one Sarah loved to give out. That's part of the reason. That's her corner. I know that's her horse. That's why I don't try to step on her corner. When we did capping the card together, I know she always likes talking about Hoist the Gold. And listen, that's just what the horse does. Horse finishes underneath in a big spot and at a big price. So use it, and so that's what happened there. But obviously, feel good story with Cody's Wish and a great effort there for Bill Mott's horse. That's really kind of coming to his own and become a little bit of a national celebrity. And then the race right before the Kentucky Derby, Up to the Mark, the Todd Pletcher colt, who I think a lot of us were very high on going into that Maker's Mark mile, ran third, but right next to Modern Games, who I think I hold in very high regard as a really great turf horse. That was one where, Up to the Mark looked good. 5-2 on the board, but and a shorter price than maybe some people were comfortable with. But Up to the Mark just looks so much better than everybody else. I mean, just pulled away at ease. Hong Kong Harry, I thought, made a nice run for second, but ultimately Up to the Mark they blew him out. Spooky Channel got up for third. I like that horse a lot. But Up to the Mark looked really, really good. So that was some of the stakes action obviously taking place over the weekend. But listen, there's another side of this story. And that is that at Churchill Downs, over the last 9 days, there have been 7 deaths of horses. And there's no easy transition to this topic. So we might as well just transition to it. This is flat out unacceptable. One of the bigger names in the sport, Safi Joseph Jr., has been suspended indefinitely from Churchill Downs Incorporated owned tracks. That means Churchill Downs, that means Colonial Downs, that means Fairgrounds, suspended from all Churchill Downs owned tracks because of presumably what they found in his barn. 2 of the horses that died were his. Presumably there was some at least preliminary investigation that led them to believe that there was a suspension-worthy offense. Safi, of course, comes out with a statement saying, I've done nothing wrong. CDI is rushing this. There's no due process. And what I will say, and this is one where I look at this and I go, I don't like either of these sides in this dispute. There's always been rumors about Safi. There's always been, murmurs about Safi. And Safi's faced suspensions before. I mean, but just about every trainer has faced some type of suspension for something before. It's inevitable that all trainers get popped for something, even if it's a very minor offense. But so Safi, I'm not going to sit here and defend Safi by any stretch of the imagination. I also am not going to defend Churchill Downs, who does feel like they like being judge, jury, and executioner and jumping the gun maybe a little bit on this stuff and puffing out their chest and making them seem like there's some big, bad, tough organization on this. There are other horses than Safi's that are dying, and they're dying on your track, and they're dying because there's a lot of speculation that your track is not safe. We saw 2 horses break down on the Kentucky Derby Day card that had to be euthanized, including Freezing Point in the Pat Day Mile. That was disgusting. That was horrific to watch, terrible to see. But Churchill Downs has a problem. This is the same organization that can't grow grass. All right. So forgive me if I don't hold them with the utmost authority on these matters. They are a flawed organization. They just are, flat out. And I don't care who's watching this, and I know there are people in the industry who watch this show. They are a flawed organization, and they need to take more accountability than pointing at Safi and going, that's the problem. Point the finger at yourself sometimes. Point the finger at yourself. The morning line favorite of the Kentucky Derby scratched because he took a misstep. Now, did he take a misstep because he just naturally did? Did he take a misstep because the track is maybe not safe and the surface is not laid properly? It does seem like some of these breakdowns are taking place at roughly the same place in the track consistently. 7 deaths in 9 days? Come on. What are we doing? Now, that being said, I've seen other people post the counterpoint, which is to say there is a entire network of people on track 24/7 to keep these horses safe. And they're absolutely right. There are. 99.9% of the people in this industry are fantastic and care about these horses and try to do what's best for these horses. But we cannot have weeks like we just had at Churchill Downs. We can't have Wild on Ice breaking down during a workout. We can't have the morning line favorite taking a misstep and being a scratch. We can't have Freezing Point getting pulled up that was such a scary, ugly looking. I forced myself to watch that replay. I didn't like 1 second of it. We can't have that. We have to do better. Okay? We have to do better. As an industry, as organizations. Right up the road from me in Laurel Park, we have had a slew of issues with that track as well. They've had to shut it down. They've had to have people come out and inspect it to make sure it is safe to resume racing. They've had breakdowns there. They had breakdowns last year. They've had to relay the surface. They've had to do a lot of things there. These tracks have to take accountability, keep these horses safe. If we don't have horses, we don't have a sport. So we got to do right by the horses. And it's unfortunate and it's sad. And listen, there are a lot of ugly stories that unfortunately came out of Kentucky Derby Week. There are a lot of great ones too. Mage is a fantastic story. Two Phils is a tremendous story. Angel of Empire, Pennsylvania bred horse finishing there. That's a great story. There are great stories, great people in this sport, but it's just so frustrating to see those other terrible things taking place. I know I was on my soapbox for the last 3-4 minutes, and I apologize for that. I try not to get on it too often. I try to be pretty level-headed about this stuff, point A versus point B, but we just can't have weekends like we just had. I mean, we just can't, flat out. We can't have horses getting vanned off and euthanized on the biggest day, and we can't have that ever. We shouldn't be having that ever, okay? Or at such a incremental fraction. We should not certainly have a rash like we did here at Churchill Downs on the biggest week of our sport. So frustrating. Try to do better. It's why we do what we do here at Trust the Profits, where we try to give to thoroughbred aftercares, because listen, there are other horses. I know a horse like Hear My Song got pulled up, if I'm not mistaken. It sounds like that horse is okay, but their racing might not race again. but the horse is okay, not catastrophic injury. But we give to organizations so that horses that don't have any more races to run can go retire somewhere and go live the rest of their lives somewhere in peace and comfort and with kindness surrounding them. That's why we give what we do. It's not to make ourselves feel good. It's not so we get pats on the back about how how nice we are about this sort of stuff. That's all well and good, and that comes along with it. We give because we care about these horses, and we want to make sure they're being cared for after the racing careers are over. So that's my soapbox. I'll get off of it now, but we have a lot of racing coming up this week. Listen, we're going to do Cap in the Card still again. We're going to go a huge weekend at Belmont. How exciting are we? Belmont's going to get a whole. It's going to get completely redone. We've already seen a lot of revisions, obviously, with Belmont, but they're back there racing big weekends. We're going to do Cap in the Card at Belmont. We're going to do some stakes previews. Colin's going to be doing Doubling Down. We're going to have a lot of Preakness previews already as that field starts to take shape. So a lot of exciting stuff here on Trust the Profits. Make sure to press that subscribe button here on YouTube to subscribe to all that we have. Make sure to press that like button and comment below with what you think was the biggest takeaway from Kentucky Derby weekend. All right, friends, until next time, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.